Today, my devotional topic is a twist on one many of you have heard in Mass or church services many times, the potter and the clay. But my talk is titled An Exquisite Teacup. It is inspired by an encouraging story I read online, but could find no author. And it's told from the view of the teacup, or the clay, on its way through the process of completion. As I read the story, imagine yourself as being the teacup. And at the end, after I read the moral of the story, we can talk about what the teacup, or you, experienced. There was a couple that used to go to England to shop in a beautiful store. They both liked antiques and pottery, especially teacups. This was their 25th wedding anniversary. One day, in a beautiful shop, they saw an exquisite teacup. They asked the clerk, "May we see that? We've never seen one quite so lovely." As the lady handed it to them, suddenly the teacup spoke. "You don't understand," it said. "I haven't always been a teacup. There was a time when I was red and I was clay. My master took me and rolled me and patted me over and over, and I yelled out, 'Let me alone!' But he only smiled and said, 'Not yet.' Then I was placed on a spinning wheel and suddenly spun around and around and around. 'Stop it, I'm getting dizzy,' I screamed. But the master only nodded and said, 'Not yet.' Then he put me in the oven. I never felt such heat. I wondered why he wanted to burn me, and I yelled and knocked on the door. I could see him through the opening, and I could read his lips as he shook his head and said, 'Not yet.' Finally, the door opened. He put me on a shelf, and I began to cool. 'There, that's better,' I said. And he brushed and painted me all over. But the fumes, they were horrible. I thought I would gag. 'Stop it, stop it,' I cried. He only nodded. 'Not yet.' Then suddenly, he put me back in that old oven. Not like the first one, though. It was twice as hot this time, and I just knew I would suffocate. I begged and I pleaded. I screamed and I cried. All the time I could see him through the opening, nodding his head and saying, 'Not yet.' Then I knew there wasn't any hope. I would never make it. I was ready to give up, but the door opened, and he took me out and placed me on a shelf. 1 hour later, he handed me a mirror and said, 'Look at yourself.' And I did. And I said, 'Wait a minute. That's not me. That couldn't be me. It's beautiful. I'm beautiful.' 'I want you to remember then,' he said. 'I know it hurts to be rolled and patted, but if I had left you all alone, you'd have dried up. I know it made you dizzy to spin around on that wheel, but if I had stopped, you would have crumbled. I knew it hurt and was hot and disagreeable in the oven, but if I hadn't put you there, you would have cracked. I know the fumes were bad when I brushed and painted you all over, but if I hadn't done that, you never would have hardened. You would not have held together. Now, you are a finished product. You are what I had in mind when I first began with you.' So, the moral of the story is God knows what He's doing for all of us. He's the potter. We are His clay. He will mold us and make us so that we may be made into a flawless piece of work to fulfill His good, pleasing, and perfect will. So what do you think of the story? When you apply it to the biblical comparison of the potter and the clay, do you see yourself going through stages and reacting just like the teacup? It's hard not to, isn't it? But how important each step of the refining process is, both in pottery making and in spiritual maturity. Isaiah 64:7 tells us, "Yet, O Lord, you are our Father. We are the clay, and you are the potter. We are all the work of your hands." At different points, the little teacup was filled with anger and couldn't understand why it had to endure such hardship. And at other times, it was just so confused as it watched through flames that it perceived as doing only harm, peering at the master who didn't seem to care and only shook his head and kept repeating those seemingly hurtful words, "Not yet." That's where we become so like the little teacup, isn't it? We immediately want out without asking God, what is it I'm supposed to learn or gain from this particular situation? Psalm 37:7 instructs us to be still, therefore, before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. And also, John 13:7, Jesus Himself says, "You do not realize what I am doing, but later you will understand." And when the Master was finally satisfied that the teacup was refined as much as it could be, He took it out of the fire, placed it on the shelf, and showed off its glorious beauty. Pray and ask God for the patience to allow Him the time we seek, so He'll be our guide through a turbulent or painful situation. He will use it to refine us in the same way. The process may not be pleasant all the time. We may huff and puff and want to blow the house down, but we must remember that just like the teacup, our Master is at work in us, creating a masterpiece, and a masterpiece must be refined and painted by the skilled maestro.